Beneath your feet, a conversation older than language. Right now, as you listen to this, trillions of insects are speaking, not in words, in chemicals, in dances, in vibrations that travel through soil and air. They're coordinating, navigating, warning, teaching. They've been doing this for 400 million years. Long before humans invented the internet, insects built the first network on Earth, and it's still running. But here's what we didn't understand until recently. These networks aren't just communication systems, they're computational. A colony of ants can solve problems no single ant could comprehend. A swarm of bees makes democratic decisions that rival our own algorithms. Somehow, without a central processor, without a brain coordinating it all, they think. What we're about to uncover might change how we see intelligence itself, and our place in the web of life. This is Omni. Stories about life, matter, and the mystery in between. Like the video, drop your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe if you believe curiosity should never end. Picture a single ant on a forest floor. She's moving through darkness, navigating fallen leaves, twigs, patches of moss. She's searching, not aimlessly but with purpose, and then suddenly she stops. Her antennae twitch. She's found something invisible to us but unmistakable to her, a chemical trail left by another ant hours ago. She turns, follows it. Within seconds she's moving faster, more deliberately. The trail leads her to food, a fallen beetle partially decomposed. She feeds briefly, then returns along the same invisible path. But this time she's not just following, she's amplifying. With every step she deposits her own pheromones, reinforcing the signal, making it stronger, louder. By morning, that single trail will become a superhighway. Thousands of ants marching in both directions, each one strengthening the message with their passage. The path optimizes itself. Shorter routes get more traffic, more pheromones, more ants. Longer routes fade. No ant decided this. No ant understands the whole system. But together, without a leader, without a plan, they've solved the travelling salesman problem. They've built a network. This is how the insect internet works. Not through wires or satellites, but through chemistry and behaviour. Through signals that persist in the environment, waiting to be read. Through feedback loops that turn individual action into collective intelligence. We've known about pheromone trails for decades, but what we're discovering now goes deeper. These aren't just communication systems, they're computational architectures. The strength of a pheromone trail encodes information. How good is this food source? How far away? How many ants have already been there? A single ant can read these chemical gradients and make decisions. But when thousands of ants read and write to the same chemical landscape, something remarkable emerges. The colony begins to think. Not like we think. There's no central command, no consciousness directing traffic. But there is processing. Information flows through the network. Problems get solved. Resources get allocated efficiently. The colony adapts to threats, learns from experience, makes collective decisions that optimize survival. Scientists call this swarm intelligence. And it's not limited to ants. Bees use the waggle dance, a figure-8 movement that encodes the distance and direction to flowers. But here's what's extraordinary. When a hive needs to choose a new nest site, scout bees debate. They dance for different locations. Other bees assess the dances, visit the sites themselves, return and dance with more or less enthusiasm based on quality. The colony weighs options. Gradually consensus emerges. The hive votes without a ballot box, decides without a president. Democracy, computed through dance. Termites build cathedral mounds with elaborate ventilation systems, maintaining stable internal temperatures while outside conditions fluctuate wildly. No termite has the termite blueprint. No termite understands thermodynamics. Yet the colony engineers climate control that rivals human architecture. Locusts, normally solitary creatures, transform when they encounter other locusts frequently. Their nervous systems shift. Their behaviour changes. They form swarms millions strong that move as one fluid intelligence across continents, devastating crops with coordinated precision. Fireflies in Southeast Asia synchronize their flashing across entire trees, thousands of individuals pulsing in perfect rhythm without a conductor. These aren't separate phenomena. They're expressions of the same underlying principle. Connection creates computation. Communication creates intelligence. The network is the mind. But here's what we missed for so long. The insect internet isn't just between insects of the same species. It's between species, between kingdoms, between insects and plants and fungi and bacteria. The network is planetary, and it's been running for 400 million years. Tonight we're going to trace that network from the ground up. From chemical signals between individual insects, to colony-level problem solving, to ecological webs that connect entire biomes, to the philosophical implications of what all this means for intelligence, consciousness, and what it means to be alive. Because understanding the insect internet changes everything. It reveals that intelligence isn't what we thought, that minds don't require brains, that consciousness might not be something you have, but something you do, through connection, through communication, through being part of a network larger than yourself. Let's begin where all networks begin, with a signal in the dark. Let's start with something you've probably never thought about. Right now, the air around you is thick with conversations you can't hear. Not sound, not light, chemistry. Every insect that's passed through the space you're occupying has left messages behind. Invisible sentences written in molecules, each one encoding information. I was here. Danger nearby. Food this way. I'm looking for a mate. These chemical words linger, some for seconds, some for hours, some for days, waiting for the right antennae to read them. We call them pheromones, but that simple word doesn't capture what they really are. Environmental memory. Information that persists outside the body, floating through air or soaking into soil, creating a landscape of meaning that insects navigate the way we navigate street signs and text messages. A single ant produces dozens of different pheromone compounds. Each one is a specific word in her chemical vocabulary. Trail pheromone says, follow this path. Alarm pheromone says, defend the colony. Queen pheromone says, I'm alive and fertile. Keep working. Nestmate recognition pheromones say, you belong here. Each molecule is produced by specific glands, released in specific contexts, and triggers specific behaviors in other ants. But here's what makes this remarkable. The information isn't just in the presence or absence of a molecule, it's in the concentration gradient. When an ant finds food, she doesn't just mark a trail on her way back to the nest. She deposits pheromones in amounts proportional to the quality of the food. Rich food source? Heavy pheromone deposit? Mediocre food? Lighter deposit. Other ants can smell the difference. They can read the gradient and make decisions. Is this worth investigating, or should I keep searching? The trail optimizes itself over time through positive feedback. More ants on a trail means more pheromone deposit. More pheromone means more ants attracted. Good trails get reinforced. Poor trails evaporate. Within hours, the colony has calculated the most efficient route between nest and food, not through central planning, but through collective writing and reading of chemical information. According to research published in 2013, Argentine ant colonies can solve maze navigation problems as efficiently as computer algorithms designed for the same task. The ants aren't smarter than the algorithm. They are the algorithm, implemented in chemistry and behavior rather than silicon and code. But pheromones do more than guide navigation. They coordinate warfare. When a fire ant encounters a threat, a rival ant, a predator, a careless human foot, she releases alarm pheromones from her mandibular glands. The smell spreads rapidly, activating nearby nestmates. But the response isn't uniform. Close to the source, where concentration is highest, ants become aggressive, attacking anything that moves. Further away, where concentration is lower, ants simply become alert, ready to mobilize if the threat escalates. The pheromone concentration encodes both the message and the urgency. It's not just danger, it's danger. This close, this severe. Therefore, through one chemical release, information propagates through the colony in layers. Immediate defenders respond instantly. Secondary forces mobilize. Distant workers remain productive but vigilant. No chain of command, no radio dispatch. just a molecule diffusing through air, and thousands of individuals reading it, interpreting it, acting on it. Now shift perspective. Miles away, a male silk moth is flying through darkness. He's searching. His antennae, those feathery, elaborate structures branching from his head, are biological sensors of extraordinary sensitivity. Each antenna is covered with thousands of sensory hairs called sensilla, and each sensillum contains receptor neurons tuned to detect specific molecules. The molecule he's searching for is bombicol, the sex pheromone released by female silk moths. A single female can release just a few micrograms of this compound, and it disperses through the air as a plume carried by wind currents. The male moth can detect individual molecules, not concentrations, not clouds of scent, individual molecules binding to receptors on his antennae. According to research from the 1970s by German biochemist Dietrich Schneider, a male silk moth can detect bombicol at concentrations as low as a few hundred molecules per cubic centimetre of air. For comparison, that's like detecting a single drop of perfume in a volume of air the size of a large warehouse. But detection isn't enough. The moth has to navigate to the source. The pheromone plume is discontinuous, broken by turbulence into patches and threads. The moth flies upwind when he detects the scent, zigzagging when he loses it. He's not following a smooth gradient. He's tracking intermittent signals through chaotic air currents, integrating information over time, updating his course with every new detection. His nervous system, smaller than a grain of rice, is solving a computational problem in real time, extracts signal from noise, estimates source direction, maintain course through a turbulent medium, all while flying. No GPS, no map, just chemistry and neural circuits shaped by millions of years of selection pressure. Therefore, what looks like simple attraction is actually sophisticated signal processing. The moth isn't drawn to the pheromone like a magnet to iron. He's reading the structure of the plume, inferring the location of the source, and actively navigating toward it through three-dimensional space. This is information theory in molecular form. But pheromones aren't always broadcast signals meant for many receivers. Sometimes they're targeted messages. Worker honeybees produce a pheromone called ethyl olete from their abdominal glands. This compound inhibits the development of ovaries in other workers. In the presence of a queen, who also produces ovary-suppressing pheromones, workers remain sterile. But if the queen dies, and her pheromone signal fades, workers begin producing ethyl olete themselves, creating a distributed regulatory system. The colony adjusts its reproductive strategy based on the chemical landscape. Too much queen pheromone, workers stay sterile. Too little, some workers develop their ovaries and begin laying eggs. The balance shifts not through commands from above, but through collective sensing of chemical concentrations. According to a 2004 study published in Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, this creates a form of distributed democracy. No single bee decides if the hive should remain queen-right or go queenless. The colony collectively measures the chemical environment and responds accordingly. This is regulation without a regulator, control without a controller, and it scales. Leafcutter ants cultivate underground fungus gardens that can span areas larger than a football field. These gardens are the colony's food source, and they must be maintained at specific temperatures and humidity levels to remain productive. Workers deposit trail pheromones to coordinate harvesting of fresh leaves, but they also produce different pheromones to signal problems: fungal contamination, temperature fluctuations, exhausted leaf supplies. The result is a dynamic system where tens of thousands of workers constantly adjust their behaviour based on multiple overlapping chemical signals. Some workers follow harvest trails, others follow maintenance trails. Still others patrol for problems and release alarm pheromones when issues arise. Therefore, the colony, spread across multiple chambers and tunnels underground, maintains a living agricultural system through nothing but chemical communication. No central brain coordinates it. The coordination emerges from local interactions, from individual ants reading and writing to a shared chemical environment. This is where we begin to see the network properties emerging. A single pheromone is a signal. A trail of pheromones is a message. A landscape of overlapping pheromone gradients, each encoding different information, each read by thousands of individuals making local decisions. That's a communication network. But here's the question that drives us forward. If this much complexity can emerge from chemical signals alone, what happens when we add other communication channels? What happens when insects don't just write messages in chemistry, but also in movement, in sound, in light? Because ants aren't the only ones talking, they're just the ones speaking the language we first learned to decode. Other insects have developed communication systems even more sophisticated, even more unexpected, and those systems are about to show us that the insect internet isn't just chemical, it's multimodal, it's multimedia, and it's far more intricate than we ever imagined. Let's recap what we just learned. We've seen how insects write messages, in molecules, creating chemical landscapes that encode direction, urgency, identity. But chemistry is just one channel. The insect internet operates across multiple frequencies, multiple dimensions of information transfer. Some insects speak in light, others in vibration, and some have developed languages so complex they rival human communication in their sophistication. Let's start with the most famous example, the honeybee waggle dance. A forager bee returns to the hive after discovering a rich patch of flowers 2 kilometers away. She walks across the vertical comb surface in darkness, surrounded by thousands of other bees, and then she begins to dance. She runs in a straight line, waggling her abdomen side to side, then loops back to the starting point, alternating left and right circles. She repeats this figure-8 pattern again and again. Other bees crowd around her, touching her with their antennae, following her movements. The dance is a map. The angle of her waggle run, relative to vertical, encodes the angle of the flowers relative to the sun. If she waggles straight up, the flowers are toward the sun. 45 degrees to the right means the flowers are 45 degrees right of the sun's position. The duration of the waggle run encodes distance. Longer waggle equals farther destination. The vigour of her dance encodes quality, better flowers, more enthusiastic dancing. According to Austrian biologist Carl von Frisch, who decoded this language in the 1940s and won a Nobel Prize for the work, bees can communicate locations up to several kilometers away, with remarkable precision. A waggle dance lasting 1 second indicates roughly 1 kilometer of distance. Bees watching the dance can extract this information, fly to the site, and find the flowers. This is symbolic representation. The dance isn't the flowers, it's an abstract map, a set of instructions encoded in movement. The bee has translated spatial information into temporal patterns, converting distance into duration, direction into angle. But here's what makes it even more extraordinary. The dance accounts for the sun's movement. Bees know the sun moves across the sky. If a forager discovers flowers in the morning, returns to the hive, and dances hours later, she adjusts the angle of her waggle run to compensate for the sun's changed position. The direction she gives are current, not historical. She's not just reporting where the flowers were when she left. She's calculating where they are now, relative to where the sun is now. Her brain, smaller than a grain of salt, contains a cognitive map of space and time, and the computational capacity to transform that map into motor instructions that other bees can decode. Therefore, what looks like simple dancing is actually a spatial cognition system, a communication protocol, and a social learning mechanism all combined. Information discovered by one bee becomes accessible to thousands. The colony's foraging range isn't limited by individual exploration. It's amplified by collective knowledge sharing. But the waggle dance isn't just for recruitment, it's for debate. When a honeybee colony needs to choose a new nest site, a process that happens when a hive swarms, scout bees search for suitable cavities. Each scout who finds a candidate site returns and dances for it, with enthusiasm proportional to the site's quality. Good site, vigorous, long-lasting dance. Mediocre site, half-hearted, brief dance. Other scouts watch these dances, visit the advertised sites, assess them independently, and return to dance for the sites they personally favour. Over hours or days, support builds for the best options. Scouts voting for poor sites give up when they see stronger dances for better sites. Gradually, consensus emerges. When enough scouts are dancing for the same location, the swarm moves. According to research by Thomas Seeley at Cornell University, published in his 2010 book Honeybee Democracy, this decision-making process mirrors democratic principles. Multiple options are proposed. Each is evaluated by multiple independent assessors. Information is shared transparently. The group converges on the option with the most support. No bee votes for multiple sites. No bee campaigns dishonestly. The system is remarkably resistant to error. This is distributed decision-making through visual communication. The bees aren't following a leader's choice. They're collectively computing the optimal choice through repeated assessment and information sharing. But not all visual communication is this elaborate. Sometimes it's as simple as flashing a light. Male fireflies glow. Each species has a distinctive flash pattern. Duration, rhythm, colour, number of flashes in sequence. These patterns are recognition signals. Females respond only to the correct pattern for their species. When a male flashes his species-specific code and a female on the ground flashes back, he flies toward her. This seems straightforward. Bioluminescent mating signals, one-to-one communication. But then things get complicated. Some female fireflies in the genus Photurus can mimic the flash patterns of other species. A Photurus female will watch a male from a different species flashing his courtship signal. When he flies close enough, she'll imitate the response flash his species expects. He approaches, anticipating a mate. Instead, she eats him. She's hacked the communication system. She's learned the language of another species well enough to produce convincing forgeries. This is aggressive mimicry, and it reveals something crucial. These flash patterns aren't hardwired, unchangeable signals. They're learned, flexible, adaptable. Female Photurus fireflies can recognize multiple flash patterns from different species and reproduce them accurately enough to deceive males who have been responding to those patterns their entire lives. Therefore, visual communication among insects isn't just information transfer, it's also deception, competition, predation. The network has adversaries, signals can be spoofed. But perhaps the most alien communication channel insects use is one we rarely notice: vibration. Put your hand on a tree trunk. You feel solid wood, stillness. But if you could sense like an insect does, you'd feel a world of information traveling through that wood. Insects communicate through substrate-borne vibrations, mechanical waves traveling through plants, soil, spider webs. Tree hoppers, small insects that feed on plant sap, produce vibrations by rapidly flexing their abdomens against the plant stem. These vibrations travel through the plant tissue. Other tree hoppers, sometimes meters away, detect these vibrations through sensors in their legs. According to research published in 2014 by Reginald Cocroft at the University of Missouri, tree hopper mothers use these vibrations to communicate with their offspring. A mother guarding her eggs will produce alarm signals when predators approach. The signal travels through the plant to her offspring, warning them to remain still or to move deeper into protective foliage. Male and female tree hoppers also use plant-borne vibrations for courtship. Males produce species-specific vibrational songs. Females respond with their own signals. The plant becomes a communication medium, conducting conversations we can't hear. But this raises a problem. Vibrations don't travel indefinitely. They attenuate over distance, absorbed and scattered by plant tissue. How do you send a signal to a receiver who might be on a different branch, a different part of the plant? Some insects have solved this through signal amplification. Certain leafhoppers produce vibrations at frequencies that match the resonant frequency of the plant structures they're sitting on. The plant amplifies the signal, like a guitar body amplifying string vibrations. The insect essentially plays the plant like an instrument, using its biomechanical properties to broadcast signals farther than would otherwise be possible. This is environmental engineering for communication. The insect doesn't just send a signal through a medium, it exploits the medium's physical properties to enhance transmission, and sometimes these vibrational signals become coordinated across many individuals. Male cicadas produce sound through structures called tymbals, ribbed membranes on their abdomens that buckle rapidly to create clicks. When thousands of male cicadas synchronize their calls, the result is the overwhelming chorus that defines summer in many regions. But why synchronize? Research suggests synchronous calling makes individual males harder to locate. A predator can home in on a single calling male, but when thousands are calling in unison, the sound becomes directionless, a wall of noise with no clear source. Therefore, synchronization is a defensive strategy. Males cooperate, coordinating their signals in time, to reduce individual predation, risk. But cooperation and competition coexist. Within the synchronized chorus, males compete for the best calling positions, the spots where females are most likely to approach. The network is simultaneously collaborative and competitive. This pattern repeats across insect communication systems. Information sharing coexists with deception. Cooperation coexists with exploitation. The network isn't utopian, it's evolutionary, shaped by selection pressures, constantly adapting, constantly being gamed. What emerges is a multi-channel communication infrastructure, chemical trails encoding navigation data, visual dances encoding spatial information, vibrational signals encoding presence and identity, bioluminescent flashes encoding species membership. Each channel operates in parallel. Some insects use multiple channels simultaneously, layering information across different sensory modalities. An ant following a pheromone trail might also be detecting vibrational signals from nestmates ahead. A bee performing a waggle dance is simultaneously producing sounds through her wing beats, adding auditory information to the visual pattern. The network isn't one-dimensional. It's synaptic, integrating multiple streams of information into coordinated behavior. But all of this, the chemical trails, the dances, the flashes, the vibrations, these are still individual to individual or individual to group communications. What happens when these communication systems scale up? When thousands, millions, billions of individuals all reading and writing to the same network? That's when something extraordinary emerges. That's when the colony itself begins to think. That's when distributed communication becomes distributed computation, and the rules change completely. We've explored how insects communicate through chemistry, movement, light, and vibration, individual signals traveling between individuals, but now we scale up. What happens when millions of these signals overlap, intersect, amplify each other? When the network becomes dense enough that it stops being communication and starts being computation? Here's where it gets strange. A single ant is not intelligent, not in any way we'd recognize. Her brain contains about 250,000 neurons, roughly the same as a lobster. She can't plan, she can't reason. She doesn't understand the world beyond her immediate sensory bubble. If you isolated her from the colony, she'd wander randomly, accomplish nothing, die within days. But put 1 million of these limited individuals together, connect them through pheromone trails and tactile signals, and suddenly, the colony can solve problems no individual ant could even comprehend. They find the shortest path through complex mazes. They build bridges from their own bodies, optimizing the structure in real time as traffic flows across. They allocate workers to tasks dynamically, responding to changing needs without central coordination. They wage wars with strategy and tactics. They practice agriculture, cultivating fungus and managing waste with precision that rivals human farming. The colony is intelligent, but where does that intelligence live? Not in any individual ant. Not in the queen, who is just an egg-laying specialist, exercising no control over worker behavior. The intelligence is in the network itself, in the density of interactions, in the flow of information through thousands of local exchanges. This is emergence. Properties appearing at the group level that don't exist at the individual level, and it's not magic, it's mathematics. Let's start with the simplest example, pathfinding. Place a colony of Argentine ants between their nest and a food source, with 2 paths available, one short, one long. At first, ants explore both randomly. But here's what happens over time. An ant taking the short path returns to the nest faster than an ant taking the long path. She deposits pheromones. The next ant leaving the nest encounters fresher pheromone on the short path because the ant who took that path returned sooner. She's slightly more likely to follow it. She also returns faster, reinforcing it further. Meanwhile, the long path receives fewer ants per unit time, fewer pheromone deposits, and starts to evaporate. The concentration gradient favouring the short path steepens. Within an hour, almost all traffic flows along the optimal route. The colony has solved the shortest path problem, but no ant calculated distances, no ant compared routes. Each ant made simple local decisions based on pheromone concentration, and those decisions, aggregated across thousands of individuals, produced optimization. This is stigmergy. coordination through environmental modification. The ants aren't communicating directly about the solution. They're collectively writing and reading from a shared chemical memory that encodes the solution. According to research published in 1989 by Belgian biologist Jean-Louis Denneborg, this process mirrors algorithms computer scientists use to solve optimization problems. Ant colony optimization algorithms inspired by this behavior are now used to route data packets across telecommunications networks, schedule airline flights, and design circuit boards. The ants invented the algorithm first, we just formalized it in code, but pathfinding is relatively simple. Let's make it harder. Argentine ants occasionally need to cross gaps, spaces between leaves, breaks in branches, distances their individual bodies can't span. When a scout ant encounters a gap, she stops at the edge. Other ants arrive, also stop. They mill around the edge, encountering each other, assessing the problem. Then, seemingly spontaneously, ants begin linking their bodies together. One ant grabs the edge with her hind legs and extends her body outward. Another ant climbs onto her, extends further. More ants join. The living chain grows until it spans the gap and connects to the other side. But it doesn't stop there. Traffic begins flowing across this living bridge, ants using their nestmates' bodies as infrastructure. And here's the remarkable part. As traffic increases, more ants join the bridge structure, widening it. As traffic decreases, some bridge ants detach and return to other tasks. The bridge self-assembles and self-regulates based on usage patterns. It's infrastructure that responds dynamically to demand. According to a 2015 study published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences by researchers at Princeton and the New Jersey Institute of Technology, army ants building these bridges follow simple rules. If you're on the bridge and traffic stops flowing over you for several seconds, detach. If you're in traffic and movement slows below a threshold, join the bridge structure. No ant designs the bridge. No ant calculates optimal width. Each ant responds to local traffic conditions, and the structure emerges from collective response to collective need. The colony builds architecture through algorithmic behavior. Therefore, what looks like engineering is actually a distributed sensing and response system. The bridge is a physical manifestation of information, traffic data encoded in living structure. But let's push further. Can colonies do more than optimize paths and build bridges? Can they actually make decisions? Can they choose between options, weigh trade-offs, exhibit something that looks like judgment? Red harvester ants in the Arizona desert face this problem constantly. How many workers should leave the nest to forage each day? Send too many foragers and you waste energy if food is scarce. Send too few and you miss opportunities when food is abundant. The optimal strategy depends on conditions outside the nest. Humidity, temperature, food availability, predator presence, factors that change daily, even hourly. No central coordinator tracks these variables. The queen, deep in the nest, has no information about surface conditions, yet the colony adjusts its foraging force with precision. Here's how it works. Early morning foragers venture out, assess conditions, and return. If they find food quickly and easily, they return soon, triggering other workers to leave through antennal contact. Each successful, rapidly returning forager activates more foragers through direct interaction. If conditions are poor, low food, high predation risk, extreme heat, foragers take longer to return. Fewer interactions occur, fewer additional workers are activated, the foraging force remains small, the colony is using return rate as a signal about external conditions. Fast returns mean good conditions send more workers. Slow returns mean poor conditions conserve energy. No ant understands this. Each ant simply responds to the rate of antennal contact from returning foragers. According to research by Stanford biologist Deborah Gordon, who has studied harvester ants for over 30 years, this creates a collective, decision-making system exquisitely tuned to local ecology. The colony isn't following a fixed rule. It's continuously measuring the environment through the distributed experiences of its foragers and adjusting its behavior accordingly. This is sensing without sensors. The colony has no instruments measuring temperature or food density. It measures these things through worker experience, integrated across many individuals, translated into behavior through simple interaction thresholds. But perhaps the most sophisticated example of colony-level intelligence comes from an unexpected place: traffic management. Ants face the same problem human cities face: congestion. When thousands of workers are travelling the same trails simultaneously, traffic jam should be inevitable. Ants moving in opposite directions collide, slow down, create bottlenecks. Except they don't. Ant trails rarely experience gridlock. According to research published in 2019 in the journal eLife by physicists studying leafcutter ants, the colonies use several strategies to maintain flow even at high densities. First, ants naturally form lanes. Outbound ants travel mostly on one side of the trail, inbound ants on the other. No one assigns lanes. They emerge from individual ants adjusting their paths slightly to minimize collisions. Second, when congestion does start to build, ants carrying loads travel faster while unladen ants slow down, creating a kind of priority system. Ants with resources get through faster, ants without resources yield. Third, if congestion persists, some ants abandon the trail entirely and create new parallel trails, distributing traffic across multiple routes. The trail network adapts its topology to traffic demands. These aren't conscious decisions, they're behavioural algorithms. If collision rate exceeds threshold, shift trajectory. If carrying load, maintain speed. If repeatedly blocked, explore alternative route. Simple rules implemented by every individual, producing emergent traffic flow optimization across the entire network. Human traffic engineers are now studying ant trails to improve our own traffic systems. We build fixed infrastructure and impose rules from above. Ants build flexible infrastructure and generate rules from below. Their system is more adaptive. Therefore, what we're seeing here is distributed computation at a fundamental level. The colony is processing information, environmental conditions, resource availability, traffic density, not through a central processor, but through millions of local processors all implementing simple algorithms and influencing each other through chemical and tactile signals. The network is the computer. Each ant is a node running the same basic program. The program's inputs are local signals. Its outputs are behaviors that modify the environment, creating new signals for other nodes. When you have enough nodes running the same program, connected by information exchange responding to shared environmental feedback, you get computation, you get problem solving, you get what looks from the outside like intelligence. But ants aren't alone in this. Other social insects have developed their own forms of collective intelligence, their own algorithms for distributed decision-making, and some of them have created systems even more complex than ant colonies. Some have created true democracies, where thousands of individuals with different information vote collectively to make life or death decisions, where consensus emerges not through dominance or leadership, but through transparent information sharing and independent assessment. We've seen glimpses of it already in the bee waggle dance. But we haven't yet understood what that dance really represents when hundreds of bees are dancing simultaneously, when the hive is processing dozens of proposals, when the colony is literally debating its future. That's where we're going next, to the hive mind, to democracy without voters, to decisions without decision makers, to the moment when communication becomes deliberation and the network becomes conscious of itself. Ant colonies solve optimization problems through simple rules and chemical feedback. They build bridges, manage traffic, allocate labour, all without central control, but ants communicate mostly through chemistry and touch. What happens when you add the complexity of symbolic language? When colonies can share not just food here, but I found 3 potential nest sites. Here's what I think about each one. That's when collective intelligence becomes collective deliberation. That's when the network starts to argue with itself. A honeybee swarm is homeless. The mother queen has left the old hive with half the workers, maybe 10,000 bees, and they're clustered on a tree branch, exposed to weather and predators. They need shelter, fast. But choosing a nest site is the most important decision a colony makes. The cavity must be large enough to store honey through winter, small enough to defend and heat efficiently, high enough off the ground to avoid flooding, protected from rain, facing the right direction for temperature regulation, near good forage. Get it wrong and the colony dies. Scout bees, maybe 5% of the swarm, fly out in all directions searching for suitable cavities. A scout finds a hollow tree and inspects it carefully. She measures volume by walking the interior. She assesses entrance size, height, orientation. She evaluates quality against criteria her nervous system has been shaped over millennia to recognize. Then she returns to the swarm and dances. The vigour and duration of her dance correlates with sight quality. An enthusiastic scout who found an excellent sight dances strongly for hundreds of cycles, advertising her discovery to the clustered workers. A scout who found a mediocre sight dances weakly for just a few cycles before stopping. But here's what makes this extraordinary. Other scouts watch her dance, decode the location, fly to that site and assess it independently. They don't just follow her recommendation, they verify it personally. If they agree it's high quality, they return and dance for it with their own enthusiasm. If they find it less impressive than advertised, they return and either don't dance at all or dance weakly. If they already inspected another site they prefer, they continue dancing for that one instead. According to Thomas Seeley's decades of research on swarm decision-making, the swarm now has multiple scouts dancing for multiple competing sites, each with enthusiasm proportional to that site's actual quality, as assessed by multiple independent evaluators. This is deliberation. Different proposals are on the table. Evidence is being gathered and shared. Support builds for high-quality options while support for poor options naturally dies away, as scouts give up and either join stronger dances or stop dancing entirely. The process takes hours, sometimes days. Gradually, more and more scouts converge on the best site. When a threshold number of scouts are dancing for the same location, when consensus reaches roughly 80%, the swarm takes flight and moves to that site. The colony has voted, but not through raising hands or casting ballots, through transparent information sharing, independent verification, and proportional advocacy. Scouts put their reputations behind their assessments. They dance more for better sites. Other bees trust but verify. Poor options get abandoned not through suppression, but through lack of support. Therefore, this is democracy without rhetoric. No scout can lie about site quality because other scouts will check. No scout can campaign dishonestly because her dance duration is constrained by her genuine assessment. The system is resistant to manipulation because information is independently verified and collectively evaluated. Human democracies struggle with misinformation, propaganda, voter manipulation. Bee democracies don't have these problems because the system is built on verifiable observation rather than persuasion. But there's something even more profound happening here. The swarm is processing information about the external world, about dozens of potential nest sites scattered across kilometers, and computing a collective decision that's provably better than any individual bee's assessment. A single scout might get lucky and find an excellent site, or unlucky and only find poor ones. But the swarm evaluates all sites discovered by hundreds of scouts, weighs them against each other, and consistently chooses among the top options. The collective is smarter than the individual, not metaphorically, measurably. Research by Seeley showed that swarms almost never choose low-quality sites, even when scouts have discovered them. The consensus building process effectively filters out poor options. Only high-quality sites accumulate enough independent endorsements to cross the decision threshold. This is distributed cognition. The swarm doesn't have a brain, but it has cognitive functions. Perception through scout flights, memory in the dances encoded on the swarm surface, deliberation through competing dances, decision through quorum sensing. The functions are distributed across thousands of individuals, but they're integrated into a unified decision-making system. But bees aren't the only architects of collective intelligence. Termites have taken a different approach. They've externalized their computation into physical structures. Imagine a cathedral rising from the African savanna, not made of stone, but of mud, saliva, and feces, cemented together by millions of tiny builders working in total darkness. Some termite mounds reach 7 meters tall, thousands of times the height of the insects who built them. Inside, the architecture is staggering. Chambers, tunnels, chimneys, galleries arranged in patterns that regulate temperature, humidity, and gas exchange with precision. The mound is climate control. Outside temperatures might swing from near freezing at night to 40 degrees C during the day. Inside the fungus gardens, where the colony grows its food, temperature remains within a narrow band around 30 degrees C. Humidity stays near saturation. Carbon dioxide from millions of respiring termites, and the fungus farm is expelled. Fresh oxygen flows in. How? The mound is a lung. Hot air rises through central chimneys. As it rises, it's forced through porous outer walls where gas exchange occurs. CO2 diffuses out, oxygen diffuses in. Cooled air descends through peripheral tunnels back into the nest. The entire structure is a convection system, powered by metabolic heat from the termites themselves, shaped by geometry to create continuous circulation. But here's the critical question. How do blind termites, each no bigger than a grain of rice working in darkness, unable to perceive the structure as a whole, build something this complex? No termite understands thermodynamics. No termite has a blueprint. Yet the colony builds thermal regulation systems that human engineers study for inspiration. The answer is stigmergy again, but more elaborate. Termites follow simple deposition rules. Place building material in locations where pheromone concentration is highest. High concentrations accumulate where other termites have recently worked. This creates positive feedback. Building attracts more building. But there are constraint rules too. When humidity rises above a threshold, switch to building sealed chambers. When CO2 concentration rises, build ventilation tunnels. When temperature exceeds optimal range, build evaporative cooling structures. According to research by J. Scott Turner at SUNY, published in his book The Extended Organism, termites are constantly sensing local conditions and responding with local building decisions. No termite has global information, but when millions of termites each respond to local conditions with simple rules, the aggregate structure develops global properties: thermal regulation, ventilation, structural stability. The mound isn't just architecture, it's externalized physiology. The colony is regulating its internal environment the way your body regulates temperature and blood chemistry. But instead of using circulatory and respiratory systems, it's using architecture. The mound is an organ. The colony is an organism. Therefore, termites have solved the same problem bees solved, coordinating millions of individuals to produce outcomes no individual could achieve, but through a different medium. Bees use dance and deliberation. Termites use construction and sensing. Both are computation. Both are intelligence distributed across a network. But there's a deeper pattern here, cutting across ants, bees, termites, and every other social insect species. None of these colonies have leaders in the way we understand leadership. Queens don't command, they don't coordinate. They're specialized reproducers, genetically important but behaviorally uninvolved in colony operations. The colony functions without executives, without managers, without anyone who understands the whole system. Instead, you have distributed sensing, distributed memory, distributed decision-making. Each worker is a node in a network, processing local information, implementing simple behavioral algorithms, and influencing other nodes through signals. The intelligence emerges from the density of connections, from feedback loops between behavior and environment, from the fact that workers aren't just communicating, they're collectively building and reading from shared external memory. Chemical trails, dance floors, architectural structures. This challenges fundamental assumptions about how intelligence works. We think of intelligence as something possessed by individuals with brains. We think of decision-making as requiring someone to make the decision. We think of problem-solving as requiring someone who understands the problem. But insect colonies demonstrate that intelligence can be a collective property. Decisions can emerge from distributed interactions. Problems can be solved by networks where no node understands the problem's global structure. The network itself is the cognitive agent, not the individuals, not a central processor. The web of interactions, the flow of information, the feedback between agents and environment. This realization transforms how we see social insects. They're not just impressive in the scale, billions of individuals coordinating simultaneously. They're impressive in principle. They've discovered a different kind of intelligence, a different computational architecture, one that operates without the centralized processing we assume is necessary for thinking. But here's where the story takes another leap. Because everything we've discussed so far, ant colonies, bee swarms, termite mounds, these are networks within a single species. Ants talking to ants, bees deliberating with bees, termites building together. What happens when the network expands across species? When ants communicate with plants, and plants communicate with fungi, and fungi communicate with bacteria? When the signals cross kingdom boundaries, weaving together insects, plants, microbes into networks that span entire ecosystems? That's when local networks become planetary infrastructure. That's when communication systems become ecological architecture. That's when we discover that the insect internet isn't just inside colonies. It's between them, around them, underneath them. It's everywhere, and it's holding the biosphere together in ways we're only beginning to understand. Colonies think without brains. They deliberate without consciousness. Millions of individuals connected through chemical trails, dances, and architectural feedback loops produce intelligence that transcends any single member. But these are closed networks. Ants with ants, bees with bees. Now we expand the frame. Now we ask, what happens when insects don't just talk to each other, but to entirely different kingdoms of life? The network crosses boundaries we thought were uncrossable, and when it does, it reveals something profound about how life on Earth actually works. Start with a plant under attack. A caterpillar lands on a tomato leaf and begins to feed. Its mandibles tear through cell walls, releasing plant fluids. To us, this looks like simple herbivory. Animal eats plant. But at the molecular level, something more complex is happening. The damage triggers chemical cascades within the plant. Wound response proteins activate. Signaling molecules flood through phloem tissue, carrying information about the attack to distant leaves and roots. Within minutes, the entire plant knows it's being eaten. But plants can't run. They can't fight, at least not directly. So they do something else. They call for help. The wounded tomato leaf begins producing volatile organic compounds, chemicals that evaporate into the air. These aren't random distress signals. They're specific molecules that encode information about the attacker. Different herbivores trigger different chemical blends. A caterpillar produces one signature, an aphid produces another, a beetle produces a third. These chemical plumes drift away from the plant on air currents, and certain wasps hunting for places to lay their eggs have evolved to detect them. A parasitoid wasp encounters the chemical plume. Her antennae are covered with receptors tuned to these exact compounds. She flies upwind, tracking the concentration gradient, and arrives at the plant. She searches the leaves until she finds the caterpillar that triggered the emission. Then she lays her eggs inside or on the caterpillar's body. Her larvae will hatch and consume the caterpillar from the inside. The plant has weaponized the wasp. It can't kill the herbivore itself, so it broadcasts a chemical signal that attracts the herbivore's natural enemy. The plant, the insect herbivore, and the insect predator are locked in a three-way communication system. According to research published in the 1990s and refined over decades by chemical ecologists like Ted Turlings and Consuelo de Moraes, this isn't rare, it's ubiquitous. Hundreds of plant species produce specific volatile blends when attacked by herbivores, and hundreds of parasitoid and predator species use these blends as foraging cues. The plants are advertising the presence of prey. The predators are responding to advertisements. This is communication across kingdoms, plants speaking a chemical language that insects evolved to understand. But it gets stranger. The chemicals don't just travel through air, they travel through soil. Underground, plant roots are surrounded by networks of fungal hyphae, the mycorrhizal fungi that colonize root systems and extend for meters through soil. These fungi exchange nutrients with plants. The plant provides sugars from photosynthesis. The fungus provides minerals and water absorbed from soil. But the fungal networks do more than transport nutrients. They transmit information. When a plant is attacked by herbivores, it releases chemical signals into the soil through its roots. These signals travel through the fungal network and are absorbed by neighbouring plants. According to research published in 2013 by ecologist Suzanne Simard, the neighbouring plants respond by upregulating their own defensive chemistry, producing toxins, toughening leaves, preparing for attack even though they haven't been damaged yet. The plants are warning each other through fungal intermediaries. The mycorrhizal network is a communication infrastructure connecting individual plants into something larger, a forest-scale early warning system, and insects are part of this network too, not just as attackers, but as mediators. Some herbivorous insects have evolved to suppress plant defensive signaling. They inject saliva containing compounds that interfere with the plant's ability to produce alarm signals or attract predators. They're hacking the communication system, jamming the plant's distress calls. But plants have evolved counter-strategies. Some produce defensive proteins in their leaves that block the insect's jamming compounds. Some recruit multiple predator species, creating redundancy. If one communication channel is blocked, others remain open. Therefore, what looks like simple herbivory is actually an evolutionary arms race conducted through chemical communication. Plants evolving beta signals, insects evolving signal jamming, plants evolving jam-resistant signals, predators evolving better signal detection. Each species is both sender and receiver, each adaptation changing the information landscape that all the others navigate. This is coevolution through communication. The network shapes the evolution of its members, and the members' evolution reshapes the network. But the most intricate example of plant-insect communication isn't warfare, it's cooperation. Consider an orchid. Its flowers produce no nectar, no nutritional reward for visiting insects. Yet orchid bees visit anyway, sometimes exclusively, ignoring nectar-rich flowers nearby. Why? Because the orchid isn't offering food, it's offering chemistry. Male orchid bees collect aromatic compounds from orchid flowers and store them in specialized leg pouches. They use these compounds to produce pheromone blends that attract females. Different orchid species produce different aromatic profiles. Different bee species prefer different profiles. A male bee might visit a dozen orchid species to collect the specific molecules he needs to synthesize his species-specific courtship pheromone. The orchid benefits because the bee, while collecting aromatics, gets covered in pollen and transfers it to the next orchid flower he visits. The bee benefits because without the orchid's chemicals he can't attract mates. According to research on orchid bee mutualisms, this system is so specific that some orchid species are pollinated by only one bee species, and some bee species collect from only one orchid species. The communication system has become so specialized, so fine-tuned, that neither can reproduce without the other. The orchid has essentially outsourced its sex life to the bee, and the bee has outsourced his courtship pheromone production to the orchid. They've become mutually dependent nodes in a communication network where information is encoded not in signals meant to attract pollinators, but in chemical raw materials the pollinator needs for his own communication. This is next-level coevolution. The network isn't just connecting species, it's integrating their life cycles. They've become components of each other's reproductive systems, and this pattern repeats across thousands of plant-insect relationships, figs and fig wasps, each fig species with its own specific wasp pollinator, yucca and yucca moths, obligate mutualists where the moth actively pollinates the plant while laying eggs in its ovary, countless flowering plants and their bee, butterfly, beetle and fly pollinators, each relationship built on chemical communication protocols evolved over millions of years. These aren't loose associations, they're contracts written in chemistry, agreements enforced by evolutionary stakes. Fail to communicate correctly and both parties die without offspring. Therefore, the plant-insect network isn't just an information system, it's an economic system. Plants pay for pollination services with nectar, pollen, oils, fragrances. Insects pay for protection services by eating the plant's enemies. Plants pay for warning services by providing nesting sites or food to ants that patrol their leaves and attack herbivores. The currency is chemistry. The medium is signals. The result is an integrated system where plants and insects aren't separate entities interacting, but nodes in a network defining each other's existence. But we've still only scratched the surface, because plants and insects aren't the only participants in this network. Underground, beneath every plant, beneath every insect walking on soil, there's another network, older, more extensive, more fundamental to how terrestrial ecosystems actually function, the soil microbiome. Bacteria and fungi and archaea that outnumber insects by orders of magnitude, that process every molecule that enters the soil, that mediate every nutrient exchange, every chemical transformation, every signal between roots and insects and other roots. The microbes aren't just background, they're infrastructure, and insects interact with them constantly. Some insects farm them. Leafcutter ants don't eat leaves, they feed leaves to fungus gardens they cultivate underground. The fungus breaks down plant material the ants can't digest, and the ants harvest fungal tissue as food. But the fungus isn't alone. The garden hosts bacterial communities that help suppress parasitic fungus, producing antibiotics that protect the crop. The ants are managing a microbial ecosystem. They're not just farmers, they're microbiome engineers, maintaining bacterial communities that protect their fungal gardens from disease. Other insects carry microbiomes inside their bodies. Termites can digest wood only because their guts contain protists and bacteria that break down cellulose. The termite provides habitat and a constant supply of wood pulp. The microbes provide enzymatic capability the termite lacks. Neither can survive without the other. Some aphids harbour bacterial symbionts that synthesize essential amino acids absent from their plant sap diet. The bacteria live inside specialized cells in the aphid's body, transmitted from mother to offspring, locked in a mutually dependent relationship millions of years old. Therefore, insects aren't autonomous organisms, they're ecosystems. Walking assemblages of insect cells, bacterial cells, sometimes fungal cells, each contributing capabilities the others lack. The boundaries between species blur. The insect is a network, hosting networks, embedded in larger networks. And when these insects die, they don't leave the network, they feed it. Their bodies decompose, broken down by bacteria and fungi, releasing nutrients that plants absorb, producing new leaves that new insects eat, continuing the cycle. The network is circular. Matter flows through it. Carbon from air into plants, into insects, into soil microbes, back to air. Energy flows through it. Sunlight captured by plants, transferred to insects, dissipated as heat, replaced by more sunlight. Information flows through it. Chemical signals encoding species identity, resource quality, threats, opportunities. But what we're describing now isn't just communication anymore. It's metabolism. The network isn't just transferring information between organisms, it's transferring matter and energy. It's functioning as a coherent system where flows between components are regulated by chemical signals, by communication. The insect internet isn't separate from the carbon cycle, the nitrogen cycle, the energy flows that define ecosystems. It is those cycles. Communication is how the cycles are coordinated, how flows are regulated, how the system maintains itself. We're not looking at organisms that communicate, we're looking at communication that produces organisms. The network is primary, the individuals are secondary, temporary nodes through which matter, energy and information flow on their way to other nodes. And this network isn't local, it's not confined to a single forest or meadow. When insects fly, they carry information across landscapes. When they migrate, they connect ecosystems separated by hundreds or thousands of kilometers. The network scales to continents, to the entire planet. That's where we're going next. To the planetary scale, to the biosphere as a single integrated system, held together by trillions of insects transmitting matter, energy, and information across every terrestrial ecosystem on Earth. The insect internet crosses kingdom boundaries. Plants call wasps, fungi connect forests, microbes live inside insects, insects cultivate microbes. Communication networks are metabolic networks, matter, energy and information flowing together through an integrated system. But we've been thinking too small. Individual plants, individual colonies, individual ecosystems. Now we zoom out to the scale where the pattern becomes undeniable. The biosphere itself is a network, and insects are its nervous system. Every year, billions of monarch butterflies migrate from Mexico to Canada and back. They travel thousands of kilometers, multiple generations completing the round trip. As they fly north, they pollinate wildflowers. They transfer nutrients from milkweed plants in the south to predators in the north. When they die, their bodies decompose in soil far from where they were born, depositing nitrogen and phosphorus absorbed from distant ecosystems. They're not just traveling, they're connecting. They're cables transmitting information, matter, and energy between ecosystems that would otherwise be isolated, and monarchs are just one species. Painted lady butterflies migrate between North Africa and Northern Europe. Bogong moths in Australia fly hundreds of kilometers from breeding grounds to alpine caves where they spend summer in massive aggregations. Dragonflies complete multi-generational migrations that can span continents. These migrations create flows. Nutrients absorbed in one ecosystem are transported to another. Pollen from tropical flowers reaches temperate zones. Carbon fixed by plants in one latitude is respired by insects in another. The migrations wire the planet together, creating connections across climate zones, across biomes, across continents. According to research published in 2016 in the journal Science, Migratory insects transport an estimated 3,200 tons of nitrogen northward across southern England alone each year. That's nitrogen absorbed from plants in southern Europe and Africa, carried in insect bodies, and deposited in northern ecosystems through predation and death. It's a nutrient conveyor belt powered by flight, guided by instinct and environmental cues. But migrations are just the most visible flows. Even non-migratory insects create connections. Pollinators link plants into genetic networks. A bee visiting flowers doesn't just move pollen between individuals, she moves genes between populations, sometimes between species when related plants hybridize. The pollination network is a gene flow network. Evolution in one plant population affects others through the insects that connect them. Research on pollination networks reveals that these aren't random associations, they're structured. Some plant species are generalists, pollinated by many insect species. Others are specialists, dependent on one or few pollinators. Some insects are generalists, visiting many flower types. Others are specialists, adapted to specific floral morphologies. The network has architecture, hubs and peripheries, redundant connections and critical links. And this architecture determines how ecosystems respond to disturbance. Remove a generalist pollinator species, one that visits many plant types, and other pollinators can often compensate. Remove a specialist pollinator, the only species that can access a particular flower morphology, and that plant may fail to reproduce entirely. Its population crashes. The herbivores that depended on it decline. The predators that ate those herbivores shift to different prey, affecting other species. Therefore, pollination networks don't just transfer pollen, they structure ecosystems. The insects don't just visit flowers, they determine which plants persist, which genes spread, how plant communities assemble. But pollination is only one type of connection. Insects transfer more than genes. Herbivorous insects convert plant biomass into insect biomass, making energy stored in leaves accessible to predators that can't digest cellulose. They're trophic converters, channeling primary productivity into forms that support birds, lizards, mammals, spiders. Without insects performing this conversion, much of the energy captured by photosynthesis would remain locked in plant tissue, unavailable to higher trophic levels. According to a 2018 analysis published in PNAS, insects constitute the majority of animal biomass in most terrestrial ecosystems. They're not a minor component, they're the foundation. Remove insects and you collapse food webs. Birds that feed on insects decline. Mammals that feed on those birds decline. The cascade propagates upward through trophic levels, but it also propagates downward. Insects are the primary decomposers in most ecosystems. They shred leaves, accelerating decay. They fragment wood, allowing fungi and bacteria to access internal tissues. They consume dead animals, recycling nutrients that would otherwise be trapped in carcasses. A single dead log in a forest might host hundreds of insect species over its decades-long decomposition. Bark beetles tunnel under bark, opening paths for fungal spores. Carpenter ants excavate galleries, fragmenting wood structure. Termites consume the cellulose, bacteria in their guts converting it to simpler compounds. Scavenging beetles consume fungal fruiting bodies growing on the log's surface. Predatory beetles hunt the scavengers. The log isn't just decaying, it's being processed through a network of species interactions, each insect playing a role in breaking down complex molecules into forms that plants can reabsorb. The insects are mediating the nutrient cycle, determining how fast carbon and nitrogen return to soil, how quickly nutrients become available for new growth. Therefore, insects aren't just eating and being eaten, they're regulating ecosystem function. They're controlling rates, decomposition rates, nutrient cycling rates, energy transfer rates. The network doesn't just connect components, it times them, coordinates them, keeps the whole system cycling at scales from days to decades. And when you map these interactions, who eats whom, who pollinates whom, who decomposes what, you get networks that look eerily similar to other networks humans have studied. Neural networks in brains, the internet, social networks, economic systems, all characterized by power law distributions where a few nodes have many connections and most nodes have few, all exhibiting small world properties where any node can be reached from any other through just a few steps, all showing modularity where clusters of densely connected nodes form semi-independent subsystems. The mathematics are the same. The topology is the same, the dynamics are the same. According to network theory developed over the past 2 decades, these structural similarities aren't coincidental. They emerge from fundamental constraints: how systems evolve to balance efficiency and robustness, how information or resources flow through networks with limited connection costs, how systems maintain function despite perturbations. Insect-mediated ecological networks evolved to solve the same optimization problems human communication networks face: how to transfer resources efficiently, how to maintain function when components fail, how to adapt to changing conditions. The solutions look similar because the problems are universal, but here's where it gets profound. These networks aren't just similar to neural networks and the internet, they preceded them by hundreds of millions of years. The first flying insects appeared roughly 400 million years ago. The first flowering plants and their insect pollinators co-evolved starting around 140 million years ago. Complex insect societies emerged at least 100 million years ago. For the vast majority of Earth's history, the insect internet was the most sophisticated information processing system on the planet. Long before neurons, before brains, before anything we'd recognize as intelligence, insects were building distributed communication networks that solved optimization problems, made collective decisions, coordinated behavior across millions of individuals. When vertebrates evolved nervous systems, they weren't inventing network-based information processing. They were internalizing it, bringing inside a single organism the distributed processing that insects had already implemented across colonies and ecosystems. Your brain is a network of 86 billion neurons connected by trillions of synapses, processing information through patterns of activation cascading through structured connections. An ant colony is a network of millions of individuals connected by chemical and tactile signals, processing information through patterns of behavior cascading through structured interactions. Different substrate, same principles, same mathematics. Therefore, the insect internet isn't a metaphor. It's not us projecting human technology onto nature. It's the template, the original distributed computing system, the proof of concept that network-based intelligence works, that it scales, that it can persist for geological timescales, and it's still running, right now, everywhere. The Amazon rainforest processes more than 2 billion tons of carbon annually through insect-mediated interactions. Pollination networks maintain genetic diversity in tens of thousands of plant species. Decomposer networks recycle nutrients through soil at rates that determine forest productivity. Herbivore networks regulate plant populations, preventing any single species from dominating, maintaining the diversity that makes rainforests resilient. The network isn't just in the Amazon. It's everywhere photosynthesis happens. Grasslands, temperate forests, boreal zones, tundra. Every terrestrial ecosystem is wired together by insect-mediated flows of matter, energy, and information. And when we disrupt it, the consequences cascade. Pesticides don't just kill target species, they break communication links. Neonicotinoid insecticides interfere with insect nervous systems, disrupting their ability to learn, navigate, communicate. Bees exposed to sublethal doses can't perform waggle dances correctly. They return to hives and give wrong directions. The information system breaks down. Habitat fragmentation doesn't just reduce habitat area, it breaks network topology. Pollinators can't travel between isolated plant populations. Gene flow stops. Local populations become genetically isolated, less able to adapt to changing conditions. The network fragments into disconnected pieces, each more vulnerable to collapse. Climate change doesn't just warm temperatures, it desynchronizes relationships. Plants bloom earlier, before their pollinators emerge. Caterpillars hatch before. Their host plants leaf out. Predators arrive after prey populations have already peaked. The timing relationships, evolved over millions of years, break. Communication happens, but between the wrong parties at the wrong times. According to a 2019 global assessment, insect populations have declined by an average of 25% over the past 30 years. Some regions show declines exceeding 75%. The network is failing. Not everywhere, not all at once, but progressively. Links breaking, flows slowing, information getting lost. And because the network is integrated, because insects mediate nutrient cycling, pollination, decomposition, herbivory, predation. Losing insects means losing ecosystem function. Plants unpollinated, nutrients uncycled, carbon unprocessed, food webs collapsing from the bottom. We're not just losing species, we're losing the connections between species. We're losing the network that holds the biosphere together. But here's the most unsettling part. We don't fully understand what we're losing, because the network is so complex, so interconnected, so dependent on millions of species interacting in ways we've barely begun to map. We can't predict which breaks will be catastrophic and which will be absorbed by redundancy. We're running an experiment on the planet's information infrastructure, cutting cables without knowing what they connect, breaking links without understanding what flows through them, and we're doing it to a system that's older, more sophisticated, more fundamental to life on Earth than anything humans have built. The insect internet isn't some curiosity we can study at leisure. It's infrastructure, planetary infrastructure, and it's failing. But before we drown in the implications of what we're losing, we need to ask a deeper question. What is this network really? What does it mean that life organizes itself this way? What does the insect internet reveal about the nature of intelligence, consciousness, and what it means to be alive? That's where we're going next, to the philosophical implications, to the questions that emerge when we take seriously the idea that networks think, that connections create consciousness, that life itself might be a conversation we've been part of all along. The insect internet spans the planet. Insects migrate, pollinate, decompose, herbivore, connecting ecosystems through flows of matter, energy, and information. The network preceded human intelligence by hundreds of millions of years. It's planetary infrastructure, and it's failing. But beneath the ecological crisis lies a deeper question. What does the existence of this network tell us about the nature of intelligence itself? We need to talk about what we mean when we say something is intelligent. For most of human history, intelligence meant human-like cognition, reasoning, language, self-awareness, the ability to manipulate abstract symbols, plan for the future, reflect on the past. We built tests to measure it, IQ, tests, Turing tests, benchmarks that assumed intelligence looks like us. Then we encountered animal cognition, chimpanzees using tools, dolphins recognizing themselves in mirrors, crows solving multi-step puzzles. We expanded the definition slightly. Intelligence includes problem-solving, learning, memory, still centered on individual brains, but willing to acknowledge that other species possess it too in diminished forms. But the insect internet forces us to confront something more radical. A colony of ants solves the travelling salesman problem without any ant understanding what a problem is. A swarm of bees makes democratic decisions without any bee comprehending democracy. A termite mound regulates temperature without any termite grasping thermodynamics. The system displays all the hallmarks of intelligence: problem-solving, adaptation, learning, memory, decision-making, but it's not located in any individual, so where is it? The traditional answer is that it's emergent. Intelligence emerges from the interactions between non-intelligent components. Neurons are individually simple, but connected in vast networks they produce consciousness. Ants are individually limited, but connected through pheromone trails they produce colony-level cognition. But calling it emergent just labels the phenomenon. It doesn't explain what's actually happening. Here's a different framing. Intelligence isn't a property organisms have. It's a process networks do. Think about your brain. You don't have 86 billion separate intelligences corresponding to your 86 billion neurons. You have one intelligence that arises from patterns of activity flowing through structured connections. The intelligence isn't in the neurons, it's in how they're connected, how signals propagate, how patterns of activation cascade and interfere and integrate across the network. The substrate matters less than the topology. Neurons connected through synapses, ants connected through pheromone trails, computers connected through Ethernet cables. If the connectivity patterns are similar, if information flows similarly, if the network performs similar computations, then the intelligence is functionally equivalent regardless of what the nodes are made of. Therefore, an ant colony isn't like a brain. It is a brain, implemented in a different substrate. The queen isn't the commander, she's more like a reproductive gland. The workers aren't following orders, they're implementing local algorithms that collectively produce global cognition. The colony thinks. Not metaphorically, actually. According to research by Deborah Gordon published over decades of ant colony studies, colonies learn over their lifespan. Young colonies respond to disturbances frantically, sending many workers to investigate. Mature colonies respond more efficiently, sending just enough workers to address the problem. The colony is learning from experience, refining its responses, getting better at decision-making over time. But no individual ant is learning these colony-level behaviours. Worker ants live for months. Colonies live for decades. The learning happens at the network level, encoded in patterns of interaction, in the statistical structure of who encounters whom and how often. The memory isn't stored in any ant's nervous system. It's stored in the network topology itself, in the probability distributions of interactions, in the collective history of responses to past disturbances. This is distributed cognition. And once you see it in ant colonies, you start seeing it everywhere. A forest isn't just a collection of individual trees. It's a cognitive system. Trees share resources through mycorrhizal networks. Mother trees preferentially support their offspring. Older trees provision younger trees in deep shade, keeping them alive until canopy gaps open. The forest manages its resources collectively, making decisions about allocation that optimize long-term survival over individual growth. According to Suzanne Simard's research on forest networks, the system learns. Forests that have experienced drought stress respond differently to subsequent droughts, allocating resources more conservatively, preparing for future stress based on past experience. But no individual tree holds this memory. It's in the network, in the fungal connections, in the chemical signaling patterns, in the collective response shaped by previous disturbances. Therefore, cognition distributes across scales. Neurons in brains, individuals in colonies, trees in forests. Each level displays learning, memory, decision-making, not because the components are individually intelligent, but because the network topology enables information processing. But this raises an uncomfortable question. If intelligence is network-based, if cognition emerges from connected components implementing simple algorithms, then what are we? You think of yourself as a unified consciousness, a single you experiencing the world, making decisions, holding memories. But your brain contains no central processor, no homunculus sitting in a control room watching the screens of your senses. Consciousness doesn't happen in one place. It's distributed across regions: visual cortex, auditory cortex, prefrontal cortex, limbic system, each processing different aspects of experience, all running in parallel, all integrated through connectivity. You're a network. Your sense of unified self is an emergent property of information integration across millions of parallel processes. The you that feels like it's in control is a story the network tells itself about its own activity. And that's not even accounting for the microbiome. The trillions of bacteria in your gut influence your mood, your decisions, your health. They produce neurotransmitters that affect your brain. They communicate with your nervous system through the vagus nerve. You're not a single organism. You're an ecosystem, a network of human cells and bacterial cells and probably some archaeal cells and maybe some fungal cells, all contributing to the cognitive processes you experience as thinking. Therefore, the boundary between self and other, between individual and collective, isn't as clear as we assumed. You're already a colony. Your consciousness is already distributed. The insect internet isn't alien. It's the same pattern, scaled differently, using different substrates but implementing similar principles. And once you accept that intelligence can be distributed, that consciousness can emerge from networks of non-conscious components, the philosophical implications cascade. Is a colony conscious? Does an ant colony have subjective experience? We don't know. We can't know, not directly. Consciousness is the hardest problem in philosophy precisely because we can't access anyone else's subjective experience. You assume other humans are conscious because they're structurally similar to you. You're less confident about dogs, even less about fish, probably skeptical about insects. But if consciousness correlates with information integration, with the density and complexity of connections, with the sophistication of information processing, then maybe consciousness isn't binary. Maybe it's not present or absent, but more or less. According to integrated information theory, proposed by neuroscientist Giulio Tononi, consciousness corresponds to the amount of integrated information a system generates. A system is conscious to the extent that it unifies information across its components in ways that can't be decomposed into independent parts. By this measure, your brain is highly conscious. Vast amounts of information integrated across billions of neurons. A simple reflex arc is barely conscious, minimal integration, and an ant colony, somewhere in between, not as integrated as a brain, but more integrated than disconnected individuals. Some degree of unified experience might exist at the colony level, inaccessible to the individual ants who compose it. We can't prove this, but we also can't disprove it, and the more we study collective behaviour, the harder it becomes to dismiss the possibility that the network itself, not the individuals, but the web of interactions, might be the locus of something like subjectivity. But even if colonies aren't conscious in ways we'd recognise, they're definitely cognitive. They process information, they make decisions, they learn, they remember, and they do all this without the centralised architecture we assumed cognition required. This changes how we think about intelligence in machines. For decades, artificial intelligence research pursued the brain model: build a powerful central processor, give it vast memory, train it on massive data sets. We've made extraordinary progress. Neural networks can now recognise images, translate languages, generate text, play chess and Go at superhuman levels. But we struggle with tasks insect colonies solve easily: distributed coordination, robust decision-making with minimal information, adapting to unpredictable environments, operating without central control or global information. According to researchers in swarm robotics and distributed AI, insect colonies offer an alternative architecture. Instead of one powerful processor, use many simple agents with local sensing and local rules. Let coordination emerge from interactions. Make the system robust through redundancy rather than through individual sophistication. Ant colony optimization algorithms are already used to solve routing problems in telecommunications and logistics. Swarm algorithms inspired by flocking behavior guide drone formations. Distributed consensus protocols inspired by bee democracy coordinate decisions in blockchain networks. We're not just studying insect networks, we're implementing them in technology. Translating biological algorithms into digital systems, recognizing that the insect internet discovered computational principles we're only now beginning to formalize. Therefore, insects aren't just ecologically important, they're intellectually important. They prove that intelligence can take radically different forms. That cognition doesn't require brains the way we build them. That consciousness might be far more widespread and diverse than we imagined. And if intelligence is fundamentally about networks, about connection, about information flowing through structured interactions, then the question we should be asking isn't which organisms are intelligent, but which networks display cognition. And once we ask that question, the answer becomes clear: all of them. Every ecosystem is a cognitive network. Every forest, every coral reef, every soil microbial community. They all process information, make collective decisions, learn from experience, adapt to changing conditions. The biosphere isn't just inhabited by intelligent organisms, it is itself an intelligent system. A planetary-scale network that's been processing information, solving problems, adapting and evolving for billions of years. And we are nodes in that network, not separate from it, not observers studying it from outside, participants, components, part of the conversation. That's the final realization we need to confront. That's where the insect internet ultimately leads us. To the understanding that we've never been individuals, we've always been connections, and the question isn't whether we're part of something larger, but whether we're willing to acknowledge what we've always been part of. Intelligence isn't something organisms possess, it's something networks do. Consciousness might not be binary but scalar, distributed across connections rather than concentrated in individual brains. Insect colonies, forests, ecosystems, they all process information, make decisions, learn. And humans aren't separate observers, we're nodes, components. Part of a conversation that's been running for hundreds of millions of years. Let's bring this back to where we started, to that single ant on the forest floor following a chemical trail left hours ago by a nestmate she'll never meet. She doesn't know she's part of a network. She doesn't understand that her behaviour, combined with millions of others like her, produces intelligence far beyond her individual capacity. She just follows simple rules. Detect pheromone, move toward higher concentration, deposit more pheromone if you find food. But through those simple rules, implemented by countless individuals, the colony navigates, it optimizes, it learns, it thinks. Now zoom out. You're reading these words, processing information, making sense of ideas. You think you're doing this alone, as an individual mind, but you're following rules too. Neural algorithms shaped by evolution, linguistic patterns learned from others, conceptual frameworks transmitted through culture. Your thoughts aren't purely yours, they're echoes of millions of previous thinkers, patterns inherited and modified and passed forward, and you're embedded in networks you barely perceive. Economic networks that determine what resources you access. Social networks that shape what information reaches you. Ecological networks that provide the oxygen you breathe, the food you eat, the stable climate that makes your existence possible. You are the ant, following trails laid by others, contributing to patterns you don't fully understand. Part of something vastly larger than yourself. The difference is that you can become aware of it. You can recognize the network. You can understand your position within it, your dependence on it, your influence on it, and that recognition changes everything. For most of human history, we saw ourselves as separate. Humans here, nature there. We were observers, managers, conquerors. The natural world was resources to extract, problems to solve, wilderness to tame. We built our cities, our agriculture, our industrial systems as if we were independent, as if the biosphere was backdrop rather than foundation. But the insect internet reveals the truth we've been avoiding. There is no separation. There is only network, only connection, only flows of matter, energy, and information weaving everything together. When you eat, you're consuming solar energy captured by plants, converted by photosynthesis, transformed through networks of herbivores and pollinators and decomposers. The atoms in your body were cycled through thousands of previous organisms, will cycle through thousands more. You're not a thing. You're a temporary pattern in an eternal flow. When you breathe, you're exchanging gases with every other aerobic organism on the planet. Your exhaled carbon dioxide is a plant's inhaled fuel. A tree's exhaled oxygen is your inhaled breath. You're not breathing alone, you're breathing with the biosphere. When you think, you're processing information that originated in millions of previous minds, transmitted through language and culture and technology. Your ideas aren't generated from nothing. They're recombinations, mutations, variations on themes inherited from an intellectual lineage stretching back millennia. You are network. You've always been network. The insect internet just makes it visible. And insects themselves, these tiny creatures we ignore or swat or spray with poison, they're not peripheral. They're not optional. They're the wiring, the infrastructure, the connections holding the living world together. According to estimates published in 2018, there are roughly 10 quintillion individual insects alive at any moment. That's 10,000, 1,000 insects. For every human, there are more than 1 billion insects. In terms of biomass, insects outweigh all humans and all livestock combined. They're not a minor component of ecosystems. They are the ecosystem, the active layer that processes energy, cycles nutrients, transfers information, maintains the flows that allow everything else to persist, and we're breaking it. Not intentionally, not maliciously, but through accumulation of small decisions made without understanding the network consequences, pesticides that disrupt communication, habitat destruction that fragments connectivity, climate change that desynchronizes relationships evolved over millions of years. We're cutting cables in a network we depend on absolutely, and we're doing it faster than the network can adapt, faster than redundancy can compensate, faster than evolution can repair. But here's where despair and hope meet. The network is still functioning. Damaged. Yes. Degraded. Absolutely. But intact enough to restore if we choose to. Every garden planted with native flowers is a node added back to the pollination network. Every pesticide-free farm is a corridor where communication can flow uninterrupted. Every forest fragment connected by habitat restoration is a pathway rebuilt, connections re-established. The network wants to connect. That's what it does. That's what it's optimized for over hundreds of millions of years. Life reaches out. Life communicates. Life networks. We just have to stop cutting the cables and start reconnecting them. And maybe in the process, we reconnect with something we've lost in ourselves. The recognition that we're not isolated intelligences imprisoned in bodies, separate from nature, struggling alone against entropy. We're part of an ancient conversation, a network of relationships that includes ants and bees and termites, plants and fungi and bacteria, everything that's alive and has ever been alive, all connected through flows of matter and energy and information that constitute the biosphere itself. The insect internet isn't something out there for us to study, it's the substrate we emerged from, the communication system that allowed complex life to evolve, that coordinated the relationships between species, that maintained the conditions for our existence. We're not separate from it. We've never been separate from it. We're just one more node, one more species added to a network that's vastly older and vastly larger than us. And recognizing that, really accepting it, not just intellectually but viscerally, changes how you move through the world. You stop seeing insects as pests and start seeing them as relatives. Distant relatives, yes, separated by 500 million years of evolutionary divergence. But family nonetheless, part of the same network, sharing the same planet, dependent on the same fundamental processes. You start noticing them, the bee on the flower, the ant on the sidewalk, the moth at the window, not obstacles or annoyances, but nodes in a planetary communication system. Participants in a conversation you're part of, whether you acknowledge it or not. You start asking different questions, not how can we control nature, but how can we participate more wisely in the networks we're already part of? Not what can we extract, but what flows are we disrupting, and how can we restore them? This isn't about returning to some imagined pre-technological Eden. We're part of the network now. Our agriculture, our cities, our communication systems. These are extensions of human cognition, the way termite mounds are extensions of termite physiology. But we can build our systems to enhance network connectivity rather than destroy it. We can design agriculture that maintains pollinator populations rather than eliminating them. We can build cities with habitat corridors that allow insects to move through rather than walls that trap and isolate them. We can develop technologies that monitor network health and adapt in response. We can act like intelligent nodes in an intelligent network, rather than like parasites consuming the substrate that supports us. Because that's the final lesson the insect internet teaches. Intelligence requires humility. Real intelligence, not the narrow, self-centered problem-solving we usually mean, but the broader wisdom of systems that persist across geological time, requires understanding your position in larger patterns, recognizing that your local optimization might produce global dysfunction, accepting that you don't have complete information, can't predict all consequences, must operate with uncertainty. Insect colonies do this naturally. An ant never assumes she has global information. She responds to local signals, trusts that other ants are doing the same, and the colony-level intelligence emerges from millions of limited local decisions coordinated through communication. We need to learn the same humility, to recognize that we're working with incomplete information, operating within systems we don't fully understand, part of networks far more complex than any individual mind can comprehend. That's not weakness, that's wisdom. The wisdom to listen before acting, to observe before intervening, to reconnect before assuming disconnection is safe. The insect. Internet has been running for 400 million years. It's solved problems of coordination, communication and cooperation that we're still struggling with. It's maintained planetary systems through climate shifts, asteroid impacts, mass extinctions. Maybe instead of trying to control it, we should learn from it. Maybe instead of simplifying ecosystems to make them manageable, we should embrace complexity as the source of resilience. Maybe instead of building walls between ourselves and nature, we should build bridges and let information flow. Because in the end, we're not separate. We never were. We're nodes in a network that's been conversing with itself since life began. The insect internet isn't something happening around us, it's something happening through us. And that conversation, that ancient ongoing planetary exchange of matter and energy and information, is still running. You can hear it if you listen, in the hum of bees, in the rustle of leaves, in the quiet processes of soil decomposition happening right now beneath your feet. The network is still here, still functioning, still connecting everything to everything else. We just need to remember that we're part of it. We just need to start listening again.